Hello, everyone. My name is Gail Andrew, and I'm going to be one of your presenters today. But it's also my pleasure to welcome you to today's FASD webcast, Trauma-Informed Care. It's part of a monthly series of webcasts on issues relating to FASD. This webcast is part of the FASD Cross Ministries Committee initiative and the 10-year FASD strategic plan to provide accessible educational sessions that cover a broad range of topics that are accessible to all Albertans. For more information about this series and others, check your emails for our regular updates or go to hslearningseries.ca or by following us on Twitter at AB Human Services. You'll be able to pose your questions to our speaker via live chat window. We'll address many of these questions as we can at the end of our presentation. I'll start off with some introductions. My name is Dr. Gail Andrew. I'm Medical Director of the Glenrose FASD Clinical Services. I'm also pediatric consultant in developmental pediatrics for Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital Pediatric Programs and clinical professor at the University of Alberta Department of Pediatrics. My co-presenter is Dr. Caroline Hapshin. She's a practicing infant and preschool psychiatrist. She's also the medical director of the Glenrose Autism Clinic and co-director of Elm Tree Clinic, Nurturing Young Minds. When we received the topic of trauma-informed care, I thought we should take a step back and look at what happens to the brain when it is subjected to trauma, and also to look at how can we prevent trauma and help young brains optimize their potential. And to do this, we're going to begin by discussing the Neurorelational Framework, an innovative approach to understanding brain development, as also how to understand FASD and how to guide interventions. I think we're always looking for positive opportunities to make a difference, and that can be in many ways. Some of the fundamental concepts we're going to talk about is about engagement, positive relationships, working in dyads, and training. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hapshin to begin our presentation.
Thank you for joining us. So our objectives today are to understand three key concepts of brain development. One, understanding what is toxic versus adaptive stress. The second is the understanding of the importance of high-quality relationships, and then individual differences in brain networks. And then we're going to apply these three key steps to intervention for children and adolescents. And Dr. Andrew will then present a case of a child with FASD to illustrate the concepts. So what is this neurorelational framework? It's a paradigm shift, and there's a group of clinicians in Edmonton that have been using this framework to guide our clinical practice over the last 6 years. And what we're finding is that it's a new way to hold the complexity of the cases that we see and to help us with our decision making so that we're timing interventions appropriately. It's also a very well done clinical and practical translation of neuroscience principles. So in our clinical assessments, we collect the same information and use the same evidence-based interventions, but we are feeling much more organized by these three steps that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So the Neurorelational Framework, or the NRF, is an evidence-based practice, and I'm giving you this definition of evidence-based practice, which is decision-making that integrates the best available research, evidence, with family and professional wisdom and values. So the NRF is focused on interdisciplinary and family-centered collaboration. So a real partnership between parents or caregivers and the professionals that are helping them. The Neurorelational Framework creates a shared language for all of us and also leads to a common understanding of neuroscience. And the goal is then to provide a more integrated approach for assessment and intervention. And that integration is, of course, across systems of care, which is a real challenge for us. The Neurorelational Framework encompasses all theories and approaches of all disciplines. It provides us with core knowledge, and it provides a part to whole perspective, and then the whole back into the parts. I'm throwing up this slide, which illustrates some recent shifts in research priorities. And these shifts are coming from the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States. And what we're finding is that we're needing to shift from a more simple problem, simple solution kind of perspective in research to a more holistic or a dynamic systems approach. And the NRF fits very well with the more real world, nonlinear, knowledge translation and interdisciplinary community-based kind of practices that the National Institute of Mental Health is pushing us forward to. So these are the research domain criteria that the NIMH is proposing. And I'm giving you this information because I think at the end of our talk we will demonstrate how the NRF maps on nicely to these 5 domains of looking at functioning rather than categorical diagnoses. So the Neuro-relational Framework uses the brain as the underlying model to understand how we should approach clinical cases. And last summer, we attended a computer modeling boot camp and worked on trying to actually have a systems, a dynamic systems model to describe the NRF or use the NRF interactively with computer modeling. And we created a very complex model, and then we were told by our senior consultants to try and make it a bit simpler. So we went to the metaphor of a tree. And so the metaphor of this tree is going to be demonstrated throughout my description here. So let's start with 3 key concepts and 3 key steps. So key concept number 1 is that the quality of our relational experiences helps set up adaptive or toxic stress patterns for the lifespan. Next concept is that early brain networks develop through serve and return experiences. And I will be describing this in detail and actually showing you a video. Second key concept is that the quality of serve and return experiences sets up expectations for the lifespan of experiences either being positive or negative. And the third concept is that early brain architecture is built through lived experiences. We have always a combination of nature and nurture. So these 3 key concepts about brain development map really nicely onto the 3 key steps of this neurorelational framework. So I'm going to describe the step of managing stress and assessing for stress responses, assessing for quality of relationships, and then individual differences. So let's start with step 1, understanding adaptive versus toxic stress. And our metaphor here is that step 1 is the roots of the tree. And so we're determining how deep and robust, or on the converse, how fragile are the roots. So the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, in conjunction with an organization called Frameworks, has developed this understanding of stress, that we have 3 types of stress. One is positive stress, where we have an increase in heart rate, mild elevations in stress hormones in response to stressors throughout our lives. Tolerable stress is where there may be more activated stress responses, but they're managed by and buffered by supportive relationships. And then toxic stress is where we have prolonged elevations of stress hormones and stress responses in the absence of buffering positive relationships. So now I'm going to show a video from the Harvard Center.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Okay, so I'd like to point out that those videos, they're available, of course, through the webcast, but they're also available online through the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative website, as well as the Harvard Center on the Developing Child has this video, the other two that I'm going to show you, and many more really helpful educational videos. So now I'd like to talk about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. This was a scale developed many years ago as part of a research study in the United States that took a sample of over 17,000 middle-class Americans and gave them a questionnaire that asked the 10, there's actually 9 questions on this list of adverse childhood experiences that they might have had. And what the research found is that many adults acknowledged that they had suffered adverse childhood experiences. There's actually a wonderful CBC documentary through Ideas, the series Ideas, that's available on CBC as well, that covers this topic of the ACEs. So what the study found is that folks that had a score of 4 or more adverse childhood events had many negative health outcomes as adults, including being more likely to smoke, have heart disease, cancer, lung conditions, promiscuity as adolescents, and addictions of a variety of kinds. And then when adults had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, they were much more likely to have more serious mental health issues and addictions. There have been, so that's a retrospective study. There have been also prospective studies showing that toxic stress leads to problematic health and mental health outcomes. And I've given you this slide to kind of give you the overview. But it's quite striking how widely encompassing the issues are that adults suffer long term when they experience serious adverse childhood events. And so this kind of research has helped us shift from asking folks what's wrong with you and labeling behavior as bad or within the individual's kind of choice, to having more of a kind attitude of what happened to you. And this trauma-informed shift has really been blossoming over the last 30 years. So the NRF also guides us to understand adaptive versus toxic stress, and in a very functional way for us when we work with our families. And so the NRF helps us understand what stress recovery looks like and who we are at our best, and who we are when we're having stress responses. So how do we identify stress recovery? Well, first of all, to have optimal recovery from stress, we need to have good quality sleep and be in the green zone, which I'm going to describe to you. So, but first, deep sleep is restorative and essential for our functioning during the day. And so these are some questions that you can ask families with regards to the parent's sleep and their children's sleep. So for all of us, again, throughout the lifespan, sleep is hugely important. And so what is this green zone? The green zone is where we want to be for most of our time during the day, every day. And green zone is where we're calm and relaxed, or alert and aware, and we are at our most functional for learning. So this little guy, these little people that I'm showing you pictures of, have bright eyes, they're alert, they're looking at the person taking the picture, and they're in a calm state. And this is green zone in the context of a relationship where there is sharing joy. So if we use the analogy of driving, the green zone is where we're driving just right and hopefully paying attention to other traffic and monitoring the world around us. And so the nervous system has two ways to respond to stress, if we kind of boil it down to the basic. One is that we can step on the gas, and if we step on full blast, then we can be in a flooded state. We can also put on the brakes and slow down, or we can have the gas and the brakes on together. And so this is another diagram here to show these different stress responses of hyper-alert to flooded on the gas pedal side and hypo-alert on the brake side. And we have this chart that shows parents in detail what eyes, face, voice, body posture, and movement look like in each of these stress responses. And so this is one of many handouts that are available to you if you email for them and request them. So, and this is a simplified version with the pie, because we found that some parents who have struggles with language need a more simplified version of this. So now I'm going to go through each of these stress responses in more detail. So the red zone is probably the next most easily identifiable next to the green zone. And that's where the baby or child or adolescent or adult is in a flooded state. And these are some pictures of adults that might be red. The emotion that goes with that is irritable or angry kind of responses. Here's another adult. An older fellow on the phone. And this one, a cute old fella with a bit of road rage. And so now I'm going to show you a video of a child who is experiencing a red zone response. So what you saw in that video is the adult providing a stimulus that was threatening, and that put that child into a flooded state. The next stress response I want to demonstrate is the blue zone, or where the brakes are on. And this is where children are shut down, quieter. Sometimes we ignore or miss this state because children are good when they're quiet. The baby's eyes here are glazed over. The emotions that often go with the blue zone are bored, sad, depressed. And here's a video of an infant in the blue zone.
Getting ready. Today's program schedule is brought to you in part by Barbie, a Fairy Secret DVD.
Yeah, I think Caden's ready for bed. He's trying to watch some TV. And he's just laying there.
Getting ready, Mom.
Hey, puppies. Hey, puppies.
That episode went on and on. I cut it off. Just FYI, these videos are from YouTube, and we just basically spent a couple minutes looking for babies on YouTube with stress responses, and it took us no time at all to find some videos. So that infant was non-responsive to the parent and withdrawn and not engaged in the world around him. So when the brakes and gas are both on in the nervous system, we get a more of a jerky pattern, and the emotion that often goes with the combo zone is anxiety. And so we see children in a hyper vigilant state, and you can see this with these young children with their eyes wide open, looking out for danger. This is a little one who's having some medical procedures. Some adults and another infant. And this is a baby who shows a combo or hyper-alert startle response. you'll notice that at the end of that video, the child went from being hyper alert and startled to having a red zone response. So having these stress responses is adaptive and normal human functioning throughout the day. I often describe to parents the example of driving again, so that when you're driving just right in the green zone, you're paying attention, you're monitoring the traffic. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you will have a bit of a startle response and become hypervigilant and be more aware of what's going on, and your heart may race, you may breathe a bit faster. If you get really upset, unfortunately, some folks go to road rage. Hopefully most of us don't. The blue zone response when driving would be when you've driven 5 blocks and then you realize, oh, I don't quite remember driving those 5 blocks. And then you click back into the green zone. So it's an example of adult functioning where we experience those adaptive stress responses throughout the day. And hopefully the transitions between those stress responses are smooth and we get back to green zone quickly. So when we are in a state of toxic stress, we are in a state where there's wear and tear on the body. And we use the analogy of a rubber band. So when we have adaptive stress, we stretch out the rubber band, it comes back to a nice flexible state. When we're in a state of toxic stress, that rubber band is stretched out and stretched out and stretched out to the point possibly of getting floppy and not being functional. And so when you're in a state of toxic stress, you lose flexibility, and you can either have too much rigidity or potentially be in a state of chaos. So these are 4 stress patterns that you can identify by asking questions of children and their families, and determine whether or not the child or the adult caregiver is experiencing toxic stress. And so when stress responses occur too frequently or too quickly, that's a concern. When children or adults can't adapt to normal challenges and transitions throughout the day, so the transition from the house to the car to go to childcare, the transition between playing and going to the dinner table, that would be a concern about a state of toxic stress. The other concern is when stress responses last too long. Usually when we have a stress response triggered in the body, it can last a few minutes, and 10 to 20 minutes, 20 minutes would be our maximum for settling back and getting back into the green zone. So for children where their tantrums, their state of being flooded or withdrawn or anxious lasts more than 20 minutes, that's a definite concern. And then the 4th stress or state of toxic stress or pattern is where there isn't recovery back to a robust, healthy sleep pattern or the green zone. And so I have some families that will describe to me once they kind of consider this information and say, I think my child's really only in the green zone maybe 20 or 30% of the day. And that would be a concern for that child's long-term health. As we, if you look at the information we have from the ACEs study. So what we're saying here is that if an individual has this type of stress on a regular basis, toxic stress, it puts them at risk for their physical and mental health. And for young children, for their brain development. So this might be that pie sorted out for a child who's having more stress responses and not so much green zone. So understanding step 1, we're thinking about the roots of the tree, and are they deep and grounded by a robust green zone and sleep? Or is this child experiencing toxic stress, which is contributing to more fragile or uprooted roots? And green zone grows our tree. So let's move on to step 2, levels of engagement, or serve and return. So here, the metaphor of the tree, we're experimenting with this, but go with us. We're looking at this trunk of the tree being where we, the metaphor for our relationships. And when the trunk is robust and wider, that means that there's more quality relationships that this child is experiencing in their development. And of course, then the trunk is going to grow taller as well. So how do we identify high quality relationships? And then what comes next with these high quality relationships is positive memories, positive procedural or nonverbal memories. So I'm going to describe the steps that we see in social emotional development so that you can recognize what top down and bottom up qualities of relationships are. And this paradigm is, you'll see it refers to parents and children, but it really applies to all of us in relationship with each other throughout the lifespan. And so this is another one of those handouts that is available. I use this to show parents the social emotional development. And so we'll go through the 7 levels of engagement one by one so you can see them in action, and then I'm going to show you a video. So I'd like you to kind of be thinking about this while you're watching the video. So the first kind of level of how we are with each other, where we have an optimal capacity to engage with each other, is when we're calm together. So if you think about it, you're not going to have necessarily the best quality relationship with another person if you're both not in the green zone. If one or both of you are experiencing stress responses, the quality of the relationship will be undermined. So level 2 is that when we are calm together, then we can make comforting and contact and connect with each other through all our senses, through eyes, voice, touch, movement, smell, and that starts at the beginning of life. Level 3 is that when we're having that comforting contact and being in the green zone, that we're able to share joy with each other and have happy, playful interactions. And then for infants and their parents, that's when there's that boost of falling in love and attachment forming in those positive moments that they share. Level 4 is the capacity then to keep it going. So when you're sharing those moments of joy, they become longer and more robust, and there's that turn-taking or serve and return back and forth between the caregiver and the parent. And so we get circles of communication, non-verbally. And so then in that flow of circles happening at level 5, then we expand and we develop all these nonverbal gestures with our face, with our bodies, with our hands to amplify that nonverbal message. So those are what we describe as good, the milestones of nonverbal or bottom-up engagement of individuals, of people with each other. And over the lifespan, research has shown that about 94% of our communication with each other is nonverbal using these milestones. So bottom-up engagement is automatic and habitual. It's things we do without thinking, often doesn't involve the use of words, and begins at birth and dominates the early years. And these procedural memories, these bottom-up processes last through the lifespan. Top-down capacities are when we layer on symbolic thought and language and pretend play. So level 6 is reading those nonverbal cues and expanding with able to share words about feelings and talking. And then level 7 happens by about 4 or 5, where children can share their feelings more explicitly and make sense of the world around them with negotiating and problem solving with other people. So top-down communication or engagement is conscious and effortful. It involves thinking and it involves words. So now I'm going to show you a short video from Harvard Center.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage and serve in return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So you saw in that video examples of positive engagement between parents and children. And what the research is showing us is that these, when we have experience of engaging with other people and we have moments and hopefully many moments of shared joy and having fun, we build up positive procedural or nonverbal memories and then eventually verbal memories as the brain wires up. And those sustain us and last through the lifespan and build resilience. Children who have negative experiences with other adults and who have potentially even abusive or adverse events lay down negative procedural memories, which affect them throughout their lives. I'd like to show you the next video, which illustrates an experimental paradigm called still face. So what you're going to see in the first segment is a mother and infant interacting in a very playful and positive way. And then you'll see the experimental manipulation of the mother turning away and then coming back with a still face. This paradigm was developed to study maternal depression. And what you'll see is, you'll see two things when you're watching the baby in the second half of this video. What you're going to see is the child experience stress responses. So you will see primarily combo, and then she will get flooded at the end. But you will also see this infant working hard to re-engage this mother. And she has a whole repertoire of positive procedural memories that she demonstrates of things to do to try and engage mommy back. So we'll watch this video.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So you can see in that video at the end, when the mother returns to the infant brightens and they are back to being green zone together. So that child is resilient. That child showed adaptive stress responses to a stressful situation of her mother withdrawing, but they were able to get back to being engaged and then establishing more positive procedural memories together. There was a repair that happened. And we can't maintain positive engagement all the time in our relationships with each other. We fall off and we have negative interactions. The important thing is, in our experiences with other folks, is that we have repair and that we get back to being calm and green together and having all the features of positive engagement that I showed you in those 7 levels. And what happens over time for young infants that experience extreme situations of neglect where they don't have these positive experiences of engagement with other with caregivers, is that it actually affects their brain development. And I think the slide that I am showing you right now demonstrates that. It's a slide from Bruce Perry. So joy in our interactions with other people literally lights up the tree and creates that strong, robust trunk to hold up the branches, which is where we're going next in our metaphor of brain development. So we are now going to talk about how we map or understand individual differences and how our brains develop and function. And to kind of illustrate this topic of brain architecture, I'm going to show you our third and final Harvard video about brain architecture.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
So when we're understanding brain architecture using the Neurorelational Framework, we're assessing for sources of vulnerability, so challenges, and then resilience or strengths across 4 brain systems. So the NRF has 8 chapters of a textbook devoted to this in detail. So I'm going to give you quite a bit of a flying overview. But the 4 brain systems basically are the systems in our brain that help regulate our inside world of our body, the sensory information coming into our body and brain, our feeling states, and our thinking and planning so that we can adapt to the world around us. And so when we're understanding this brain function, we need to understand that one size does not fit all, that we And we can use these brain systems to understand an individual's functioning, but also you'll see, interestingly, that they map onto the systems of care around our children. And the last principle is being very cognizant of understanding developmental versus chronological age. And so our brain systems organize our understanding of function. And so the regulation system is describing our inside body states. The sensory system describes how we take information in from the outside world. The relevant system helps us understand our emotions, memories, and the meanings that we make from them. And our executive brain system helps us initiate action in the world, or to adapt to the world, and inhibit our impulses and pay attention. So I'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. So our regulation brain system helps us sort out our inside body feelings, and infants learn very quickly to distinguish their inside states of being thirsty, not thirsty, hungry or full, hot or cold, whether they're experiencing pain or not, and whether they feel sick or well. And then also our internal organ sensations are processed through this brain system. So knowing where we are in space, whether we're moving or not, whether we're upside down or right side up, and then the sensations we get from our bodily processes of breathing, heart rate, etc. The sensory world we define by sensory processing, so how the nervous system actually takes energy and information from the environment around us, and those are our basic senses of hearing, vision, touch, taste, and smell. Proprioception is where our body is in space, balance, and then pain is here as well. And then our brain modulates that information so that it balances the signals coming in so that they're functional. So it sorts out whether there's too much information coming in, whether it's too long, too short, too fast, too slow. And the example I always give of this is that you are all modulating sensory information right now because you're sitting on your seats. But now that I've mentioned it, you're going to pay attention to that sensation just a little bit more. The relevant system is that part of our brain that makes meanings of emotions. And from the very beginning of life, as I've described, infants are sorting out these inside body feelings, the sensations coming in from the outside world, and they're figuring out, is this something positive that I want to go to and have more of, or is this something I want to avoid and it's making me feel really yucky inside and experience negative emotions? And then over time, infants and young children learn to blend emotions and lay down more memories of these emotions. And that helps guide our motivation to learn over time. And then over time, by the end of the first year of life, infants are very aware of the emotions of others and have a sense of my emotions may not be shared by the other, and it gets more complex throughout development. The executive system integrates the information from the other three brain systems and is dependent on that quality of that information. And this system is what helps us achieve our goals and helps us maintain appropriate social behaviors. And it takes the longest to develop, into our 20s. And so the metaphor for executive functioning is air traffic control, real-time, adaptive, flexible decisions. And it guides, and also the executive system in the Neuro-relational Framework organizes our movement and so and our attention. So here in our metaphor of the tree and using this model to understand a child with FASD, we're trying to sort out individual differences in all these brain systems in detail and sort out what the causes might be for these individual differences. And then so understand the individual differences of the child, and then use this system to understand the systems of care. And we're really trying to sort out what are resilience factors, what are protective factors, versus what are the risk factors. And then also, the NRF is very much about understanding the child in context. So while we are assessing the child's strengths and vulnerabilities, we're also paying attention to the parent or the caregiver's strengths and vulnerabilities. And so we do this by kind of organizing our thinking into this idea of triggers for stress, and then what are recovery toolkits or prevention, what's in our toolkit to help regulate stress responses and improve quality of engagement. So we talk to families about what the triggers are for the child, but we also talk about the caregiver's triggers. And we use this grid, which is also one of the handouts available to you with this webcast. And so we talk to the parent about what are their triggers for stress, and then what's in the toolkit for them for their stress recovery. And we emphasize the principle that adults need to put the oxygen mask on themselves first so that they can regulate themselves, so then they can help the child. And we love this diagram because it demonstrates this concept of self and other regulation. So the tiny part of the cone is where we start off in life. We only have a small amount of capacity to self-regulate, and we need the other around us to help co-regulate or use interactive regulation to help us. And then through the lifespan, we develop more capacity for self-regulation of our inside world, regulating the sensory information, regulating our emotion, and regulating our thinking, planning, movement states. And so we really emphasize this concept of how joy and softening those negative emotions help the child develop self-regulation, and that it kind of boils down to keeping the green zone going as much as possible for the child throughout the day. And we talk about that if the child does not have these interactive regulatory experiences with a nurturing caregiver, then they are more likely to experience dysregulation, like the baby in the still face video. And then if it's chronic or severe dysregulation over time, then it leads to those negative outcomes that we've talked about. And a clever colleague of mine pointed out that cone and cylinder slide can be flipped. And what happens over the lifespan is that our capacity to self-regulate may wane over time as we become elderly and need more other regulation, or at times when we're sick or injured. And this is kind of the human condition for all of us. So now we're going to move to our conclusion and our case study. So I'm going to take you back to that slide of the research domain criteria for NIMH, and I'm going to kind of illustrate that these 5 domains of functioning that this important organization is suggesting that we understand in mental health are covered by the NRF. So the NIMH is suggesting that we assess for function and study arousal, modulatory, regulatory systems, and that's covered by step 1, and understanding individual differences in the regulation brain system. Understanding positive and negative valenced emotions and our motivational system is in the relevance brain system. Cognitive functioning, of course, is in the executive system. And then systems for social process, so that's understanding our social engagement, is covered by step 2 and also the relevance system. So I think we've got most of it covered, and what the NIMH has missed is our sensory brain. And yeah, I think that's what they've missed. So I'm hoping that you can see through the information that I've provided so far that the NRF provides us with guidelines to do an assessment of a child and parent's functioning, and it also is an intervention in itself, because as you're describing this to a parent and going through this process with them, they become much more informed about their child's development and functioning. And these steps can be used sequentially and non-sequentially. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Andrew again, who's going to go through a case for us.
Thanks, Carol Ann. I'm sure most of the audience is aware that the Canadian guidelines for the diagnosis of FASD has been recently revised and published in late 2015. When we do an assessment for FASD, we look at 10 different brain domains, and we look for evidence of 3 areas of impairment within those 10 domains. We move from basic testing to more complex brain functions. And when I started to read the new guidelines and then look at the principles of the NRF to see how they actually do overlap when you look at the 10 domains. So just to refresh what Dr. Hapton just mentioned about the NRF, I'll just refresh your memory. The regulation is your inside state of arousal. Your sensory is how you take information from the outside world and use that. The relevant system is how you organize in your inside state of memory, meanings, and emotions. And the executive is how you read and adapt to the outside world. Executive is actually kind of the top of the hierarchical state. And without good executive functions, you don't have good adaptive functioning. So looking at those 4 areas, I reviewed the 10 domains. So the first 5 domains in the Canadian Guidelines for Diagnosis predominantly involve single systems with some modulation by state of regulation. As you go through domains 6 to 10, it really involves a lot of complex interactions between those 4 NRF systems. And one of the important things as you go into the higher domains in the Canadian Guidelines, you have to interpret the findings within the quality of experiences, engagements, and opportunities and relationships that individual that you're assessing has had at various touch points in their life. Because everything really involves interactive regulation between the child and caregiver. And that's very dynamic. How the child responds to the caregiver influences how the caregiver responds to the child, and you get that cycle going. The first domains of motor skills, which involves brain structure, such as any abnormalities on MRI or on neurological exam. And the second domain in the Canadian Guidelines of neuroanatomy and neurophysiology, they both really involve brain structure. Although how you use your motor skills is really influenced by what opportunities you've had in your life experiences to explore your world, to have the toys available for you to learn to manipulate. So still, although they're very basic sensory and areas and structural areas, they really involve that interaction. Cognition refers to, we measure with a basic IQ test, so your basic intelligence. The 4th area is academic achievement, is your learning ability or how you can learn information. That involves certainly basic brain, but you're also really tapping into relevance, memory, and executive function, and again into those opportunities to interact with others. When we get into the more complex assessment of the language system, language is influenced by your executive system. It's an important building block for learning. It's highly influenced by regulation and also by sensory states. So as you go up the domains, it's becoming more interactive and complex. We do a lot of testing using objective tests for the memory system. When we are looking at memory, it involves, first of all, paying attention to what you're supposed to be taking and learning. Attention is part of your executive system. Your memory also depends on your state of regulation. If you're in a high state of stress, you're not going to be able to retrieve that information from your memory. And also, the information needs to be relevant, have meaning. The 7th system that we measure in the diagnosis of FASD is your attention system. And that involves many interactions between sensory regulation and your executive components that are part of the NRF. The executive function includes many areas that we measure clinically: inhibition, impulse control, shifting, initiation, flexible thinking, and it really is in the context of meeting goals in life. That involves all the systems of executive relevance and regulation. The 9 domain of the diagnosis of FASD is called affect regulation. And we know it in children who have an FASD, often we get the history of dysregulation starting from the newborn period and patterns of not being able to adapt in a dysregulated state that can be long-standing. The way the guidelines are stated that affect dysregulation cannot be just due to an adverse life situation. It needs to be chronic. It needs to be within the mental health domain. And examples are anxiety, depression, disruptive mood disorder. So affect regulation affects and involves relevant system, regulation system, executive and sensory systems. The final diagnostic domain, adaptive functioning or behavior, includes social skills and social communication, ability to function independently across multiple environments. And that domain is probably the hallmark of FASD. We often say in FASD it's the inability to function in life in spite of some test scores that may indicate otherwise. So adaptive really involves all of the systems. So I don't think the people who developed the King Guidelines for Diagnosis realized that they were actually NRF informed. It's very NRF informed. So I'd like to talk to you about a case of Sam. And Sam is sort of a conglomerate of many of the children that I've seen over the years. So when we talk about Sam, I'd like you to think about assessing Sam for stress. Is he in a state of toxic stress? Is there adaptive? Is he in recovery? And what about the quality of engagement and relationships that he's experiencing? We need to also assess for opportunities for intervention and hopefully prevention, so we never get Sam into that dysregulated state that we can't bring him back. I want you to think about those 4 systems in the NRF. And as Dr. Hapshin mentioned, keep thinking about Sam as not what is wrong with you, to what happened to you. And then I think the bigger question, what could we, the system of care, have done better to help Sam? So Sam came into this world with a long list of prenatal stressors. His mother was very young, and she'd had quite a dysfunctional life herself, but was never given an opportunity to have the support systems that she needed from early childhood through adolescent years and into her early adult years to have a point of recovery. Her pregnancy was further complicated by malnutrition because of poverty. She lived in domestic violence. And we know from our animal research that maternal stressors have a serious impact on fetal brain development. It's mediated through the hypothalamic pituitary cortisol system, the stress system. And in some of our animal studies, we measure the cortisols in the newborn baby mice and rats. It's significantly elevated. So what mom experiences and has difficulty regulating, fetus experiences, and that carries into the newborn period. And sometimes that stress response, that hormonal stress response, does not go away. And we've been able to show that in some of our current research that we're doing through NeuroDevNet. Sam was fine at birth, and he went home to mom. So initial care by his birth mother for 6 months. He was neglected. He was quite an irritable baby, so hard to reach out to. And when we talk about that or interregulation, if he's giving mom a lot of irritability and he's stiffening and resists being cuddled, how does mom respond? If she's not getting anything positive, without help, she's probably going to spin the cycle back to giving him the negative and not reaching out to him when he cries for hunger, pain, or cold. So again, it's that co-regulation that's so important. So we've got toxic stressors set up for both, and we have set them up for failure. So what about the missed opportunities? Could we have turned this into something positive? We could have reached out to mother first before she became pregnant with the support systems that we do have throughout Alberta, the PCAP programs, the parent-child assistance programs, to help mother before she gets pregnant, to prevent prenatal exposure to alcohol, to help her with housing, food, safety, and so on, to help her deal with her own health, physical health, mental health issues, addictions, her own personal needs. And should we not have put in place something for that dyad so that they could grow together with a positive attachment, so that mother could understand Sam's cues, and so and also that she would have the toolkit so she could respond. Because if Sam's not sleeping, mother's not sleeping. That's a setup for failure right there. We have to look at both of their needs. And because we know Sam has a risk factor of prenatal exposure to alcohol, we should be giving him developmental monitoring and helping mother connect with the services that she and Sam need to do this. This is, the first few months of life can be tough for anyone, especially first-time baby, even if you don't have any other issues going on. But we didn't get to Sam and his mom in time, so at 6 months of age, he's coming into his first foster care placement because of his issues of neglect. So we've got now another layer of trauma. He's still difficult to calm. He has a very disrupted sleep pattern. He's easily overstimulated, feeding difficulties. So when you kind of reflect back over the NRF, we've got sensory, we've got regulation, all going on, and he's maybe beginning to build some of his relevance, some of his inside memories and meanings to this complex world. So his regulation system is certainly overloaded. What should we do to set this up for success? We should give that caregiver training on his own special needs. And also maybe we could train her how to read his cues. They can be very subtle, especially when we're looking for positive cues in a baby who is so dysregulated. We should counsel the caregiver on the risk factor of prenatal exposure to alcohol. It's not a definitive diagnosis, but it is a risk factor, and we know we need to optimize the developmental environment so that he can reach his full potential. We need to put in place a system to get positive attachment engagement, perhaps by referral to an infant mental health source. Create the environment, avoid overstimulation, optimize positive stimulation. Give that caregiver respite and a break. Continue developmental monitoring. That would certainly help set things up for success. We now have got Sam 12 months of age. We either the system didn't put the supports in place, but we've got foster care burnout. So he's moving to his second foster home. He's one of 4 children under the age of 8. He's very active and he's very demanding. He's walking, he's running, he doesn't listen. He's unpredictable, tantrums, physically very reactive, he's delayed in his early language development and poor quality of play. All systems are going here: regulation system, sensory system, the relevance system. What could we do to turn this into a positive situation? Again, training, training, training. We need to assess Sam's current state and explain his needs to the caregiver. He needs help with his communication system because he's delayed, but also his dyadic partner needs to understand the subtle communication that he is giving so the partner can respond to his communication cues. The caregiver needs to learn how to model play at his level of ability. Connecting them to the community early intervention services can help with this so that the caregiver is not, quarterbacking alone, that there's a team in place. Sleep care, respite for the dyad, doing this type of interregulation within the environment and addressing attachment and engagement. That's a positive system of support. It takes work, but it's much better for the developing brain in the long run, and it's much cheaper to the whole systems of care. Sam's going to move again at 24 months of age. Things were going quite well, but he's now placed with extended family members. He's continued to have difficulty with regulating behaviors. He's hyperactive, he's not listening, tantruming, still delayed in language development and play and social skills. He's moved to a community where there is no community developmental or infant mental health services. This family is so willing to work with any help they can get. They're very committed to this child. Ideally, we would, create this environment that would look at all of his brain systems. It's going to be a steep education curve for his family, but they're really, wanting to do this. Teach them how to regulate in this busy home environment by changing the environment. We may not change Sam directly, but we can minimize the chaos around him. Try to find the services for the family. They can't navigate the system alone. We need to become system navigators with them. Working on the attachment for this dyad. Because Sam's had how many attachment figures so far? I'm beginning to lose count, and I'm sure Sam is too. And we need to make sure that the caregivers get their own self-care supports. But at 36 months, Sam's moving again. He's back to foster care over health issues of his extended family members. And they're both going through grief and loss because they were committed to him and he was attaching to them. So he's got those added traumas. His behaviors escalate when they were just coming nicely into control. He's becoming more destructive, constant supervision's required. His regulation system and relevance system and sensor are just overloaded. He's trying to make meaning of all this. When you're 3 years of age, this is tough. But we try to put, again, training in place for his caregivers, support his communication needs, connect him to a community program. Medications at 3 years of age are not the first line, but looking at how can we change his environment to set him up for success. Continue to look at his sleep pattern and nutrition, maybe a role for some sleep interventions at this point. But at 5 years of age, he has to move again. He's now into a group care because his behaviors have become extreme, and the concerns both for his safety and the safety of others. A lot of acting out. Even his kindergarten placement was in jeopardy because of these behaviors. And because of his behaviors and state of dysregulation, he's not available for learning. His executive system is beginning to click in, but he's not available for learning. The staff in the group home are requesting medications such as risperidone based on past experiences. We don't want to add further damage to an already traumatized brain with medications at this point. There are many other steps before we get to that final step. So what do we do for Sam? Again, training of this multiple caregivers. In group care, there's different shifts of staff, so we have to make sure we get consistency. Who is his key attachment figure? He needs a program where he will be available for learning and socialization with his peers. So we're going to look at the environment, not medications at this time. We're successful with Sam, so by 6, he's moving out of group care to a very experienced foster care provider where he's the only young child. They're able to give him that one-on-one supervision and to really set expectations at his level. Structure consistency, so important. His behaviors improve. He is assessed for ADHD and it is then placed on targeted medications. He's beginning to learn self-care. Again, training. Can't emphasize enough of being able to support the caregivers. He's enrolled in a school program that matches his needs, small class behavior strategies. At age 8, he does receive his FASD diagnoses. Sam's a teenager. We've been able to keep him in a stable single placement. He's still struggling with learning. This is the FASD, this is not the trauma piece. This is FASD. He's struggling with learning his social skills. There's a gap between him and his peers. He's being bullied by others. He's got low self-esteem. All of his brain systems, when we used the Canadian guidelines, we got more than 3 areas of impairment when we made the diagnosis. His biggest problem, though, is his delay or deficit in executive functioning. What have we got going for him? We've got stability. The educational system is meeting his needs. He's continuing to get help with self-care, self-regulation. He's in a youth mentoring program that encourages his participation in positive life choices. His caregiver is proactive and is planning transition to the adult system of care. And this is all made possible because of his caregiver. And you remember that cone that Dr. Hapshin mentioned, that when you're very young, you're very dependent on your caregiver for everything. And then as you get older and transition, you're at the tip of the cone. In FASD, we probably never see the tip of the cone. We see the caregiver's supports being required across the lifespan. So I think we need to ask for Sam as he moves into the adult world, who's going to help him continue with co-regulation? Where are his support systems? And will he have the systems supporting him at the critical touch points? We certainly need to focus on the early years. The better job we do at the early years, but we still need to look at it with a lifespan approach. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Hapshin to do some more comments on the NRF.
Okay, so we're going to sum up here and then open it up for questions. So one of the key principles of using the NRF to organize our understanding of children with challenges is to start at the earliest point of where the challenge is. So if there's sleep problems, then definitely we need to regulate sleep, maximize green zone, and work on those first 3 levels of engagement so that there's joy being shared with caregivers. And I guess this is a really important take-home message. You can't solve bottom-up problems with top-down solutions, and often we go too high in our brain system hierarchy too fast. So I think that we need to be very careful about that. And then the important principle of the NRF brain systems helping to organize our systems of care. So I have a diagram to demonstrate this, and it helps organize family members and caregivers as well as professionals, the team that's providing services. So we have this kind of phrase micro-macro for these 4 brain systems. So on the micro level, we use the 4 brain systems to understand strengths and challenges in the individual's brain function and development, and figure out what's the trigger, and what are the problems and challenges in development, and then what can we find in this individual's toolkits. And what do we use to enhance self-regulation capacity, and where do we need more co-regulation? And as Dr. Andrew just said, this principle of the requirement for co-regulation for our children with special needs, it's persistent over the lifespan. And then I guess the other principle that if we just come from a very kind of rudimentary behavioral lens and just look at what the child is demonstrating minute by minute as behaviors and not necessarily stress responses and responses to the environment around them, then we miss out on collecting a lot of useful information. And here's this picture that I want to show you. I love this slide because it kind of summarizes the big picture of the NRF. So in the center, we have the 4 brain systems: executive, regulation, sensory, and relevance. And then you can see in the middle, in the lighter color, the areas of the individual's strengths and challenges that might be dealt, or that kind of map out in those 4 brain systems. And then on the very outside of the circle of this diagram, you can see the systems of care that map out onto the brain systems. So at the top, the executive system usually is helped by early care and education systems. Our regulation system is our basic needs and our medical needs. The sensory system is taken care of our experts with developmental disabilities, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language pathologists. And then the relevant system is usually helped by our mental health professionals. So to summarize, we're understanding the NRF as a huge support to our clinical practice. It helps us function much more efficiently. And what we're finding is it's helping us organize the complexity of the children and families that we see. And it's very respectful of all our approaches, our theories, all our disciplines, bodies of knowledge. And it really helps us organize how we can have better interdisciplinary collaboration and sharing of knowledge, and much more reciprocity between professionals to really work together to help our families that are struggling with complexity. And in an ideal world, the absence of an interdisciplinary approach would be substandard. there would be way more integration and syntheses from diverse collaborations across systems of care. And developmental research would really be focused on understanding complexity. And I think the research that's been done in the world of FASD is a wonderful demonstration of this. There is no shying away from the complexity of the challenges that children with FASD face throughout and as they grow older through their lifespan. And then this idea of us co-training together and providing services in a more collaborative way and breaking down those silos. And then hopefully, of course, the big dream is to influence public policy. So we're ready for questions and comments. I'll just highlight that this is the textbook on which the NRF is based, written by Connie Lillis and Janice Turnbull, and we've provided you with some contact information as well. So questions and comments, please.
All right, so our first question is if many of our clients experience poor sleep, possibly from trauma or inherent facial structure related to FASD, what type of recommendations can we make for important stress recovery? As sleep studies are not possible for all our clients in north of Alberta, some children have been assessed by an MD as requiring a sleep study.
Okay. Well, that's a challenging question to start us off, I think. So, Dr. Andrew, I'm going to defer to you.
Well, when we look at disruptive sleep, we look actually quite broadly at what could be the cause. In FASD, we often talk about disordered sleep as part of the brain dysregulation. We also need to look at, could it be part of the, as the questioner alluded to, part of the airway? With midline hypoplasia, there's often some differences in how the palate and the back of the nose come together so that you have obstructive sleep apnea, so that the child actually has gaps of oxygen and breathing during sleep. So they never get into a deep sleep state. It's a very disruptive sleep state. So that was what the question was, alluding to. Those kids need a sleep study, and then they need to see an ENT surgeon. But I think if going through the differential diagnosis first, if it is brain dysregulation, we're not going to cure that by surgical means. We're going to help by creating the optimum environment for sleep. Is the room darkened appropriately? Because in normal sleep, you need darkness to get your own melatonin produced. Is the child sleeping alone, or is there 4 other children in the room? Is it a chaotic environment? What about the screen time? Is there screen exposure on either iPads or TVs in that downtime when you're supposed to be going into that relaxation state, that state of getting ready for sleep before you go to sleep? So there's doing that kind of differential diagnosis, looking at the history, looking at the sleep hygiene, creating the optimal sleep environment. I would start there first. If it is based on brain dysregulation and I've done everything else, I would then consider using melatonin. Now, defer that back to Dr. Hapshin about her therapeutic plan.
So I agree with what Dr. Andrews described. I think we want to leave medication to the last resort, but for children with severely disrupted sleep, where there isn't a physical cause, that sometimes we do need to try medication. And I guess I would be advocating that for us to organize our systems of care so that children in rural areas can get appropriate medical attention when they need it. And I think it's substandard practice that we're not as efficient as we need to be in our organization of these referrals to specialists. And I think actually what I'd like to make a pitch for is that it might be an important part of this series to actually have a whole webinar on sleep, because we only can just touch on it a bit today, but it's extremely complex for our children with developmental challenges, and it's super, super important for long-term health and development.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of participating in a half-day workshop at the International Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder meetings just in April in Vancouver, and it was on sleep. And one of my co-presenters actually looked at the medication list available, the kids in the province of BC. He looked at medications and the number of children under 5 who are on atypical antipsychotics, and the number of kids age 3 on stimulant medications. And we know stimulants can interfere hugely with sleep patterns. It was quite iatrogenic sleep disorders were created. So again, I think it would be an opportunity to have a good discussion. We have some good sleep specialists that we could tap into.
Yeah, I think so. Iatrogenic means that we're causing it. It's medical system caused. Sometimes the quick fix is not the real appropriate fix. So I think sleep, thank you for that question, because I think we need way more attention drawn to these complex sleep challenges that our kids present with. And as Dr. Andrew alluded to earlier, if the child is not sleeping, the parent is not sleeping either, and then this can lead to serious burnout for the caregiver and family dysfunction.
So our next question is, can you please explain why using bottom-up methods like mindfulness is not suggested at the beginning when trying to help them cope with anxiety?
Okay, I'll tackle that one. So mindfulness strategies, I think especially the bottom-up components of mindfulness strategies can be very useful in supporting young children with anxiety. And then as children develop more cognitive and executive functioning capacities, they can employ more of the sophisticated mindfulness strategies. But certainly the basic strategies of developing, supporting children to learn to regulate their breathing and teaching them muscle relaxation strategies can be very useful bottom-up strategies to support children with anxiety. And then over the lifespan, more and more complex mindfulness techniques can be taught.
Our next question is simply, how can I learn more about this topic?
I've given everyone the reference for the Neuro-relational Framework. I presented a full-day webinar for the infant mental health promotion group in Toronto, and that's available through that organization. If you Google infant mental health promotion, you will come to their website. Dr. Lillis also is providing training, and she is going to be presenting at the next conference for infant mental health promotion in Toronto, and I think that will be webinared as well, and that will be in April 2017. Dr. Lillis is actually coming to the Canadian Child and Adolescent Psychiatry meeting in Calgary, which is being conjointly hosted with an international society for child and adolescent mental health. So she'll be presenting a keynote address. My colleague Brandine Lorraine and I are offering the possibility for workshops and also consultation for folks that are interested in applying the Neurorelational Framework to their practice.
And I should say, we used a case, my friend Sam, who has focal spectrum disorder. I work across all developmental disabilities, as does Dr. Hapshin. And the NRF can be applied with whatever developmental challenge the child has. And I think as we provide more consultation with children who have challenges and around their caregivers, and provide the feedback to the rest of the team, because it does take a team, a collaboration and communication between all team members, getting this information back to the community people who are going to ultimately be doing the day-to-day work with children. It's kind of that learning through our mutual exchanges.
So I guess the other thing I'd like to add is that Dr. Lillis is working on a user-friendly manual for clinicians and other professionals that are working with children and families. And we're also working on a book, kind of like a storybook with lots of illustrations for parents as well. And our experience clinically using these 3 steps and describing them kind of basically like I presented today with families, there's a really quick, intuitive uptake of the information, especially steps 1 and steps 2. Step 3 requires more explanation, but once we start mapping out the child's strengths and vulnerabilities using those form brain systems and describing it methodically, I'm finding that parents very quickly understand their child's development and their child's brain function in a kind of a more holistic way. It helps them make sense of what they're experiencing day to day.
You discussed screen exposure in regards to sleep and also used the video of the baby zoned out while watching the television. What are your thoughts on how this may relate to dysregulation?
That is a very hot topic within at least the Canadian Pediatric Society, and who have published, definite guidelines about what is the maximum amount of screen time. Because when you look at screen time is highly addictive to children. It's all fast-paced, it's exciting, not realistic, but when you're young, maybe it is more real to you. If you have a tendency towards ADHD, it's even more addicting. But when you look at the brain is so, malleable in those early years, and you learn through human contact, because it is, we kept talking about the dyad, that the caregiver responds to the child's signals, the child reads the parent's signals, and then responds. So you get this, it's flow, it's dynamic. Screens aren't very dynamic. They don't read you. They don't respond to your state of regulation, your mood, or they don't take into consideration your learning level. If grandma's reading you a book and grandma senses that book is, too high level for you, grandma's going to change her language to respond to your level of need and then move, slowly forward to a more advanced level when you're ready. Screens don't do that. So screens are not interactive. They're addictive, and I guess
they're basically time wasters. And I guess what we're saying is that, and I agree totally with what Dr. Andrew just said. I think it's important that we educate caregivers about the importance of limiting the amount of time that young children, older children, and adolescents spend on screens and total screen time. Today I had a family where I explained that the iPad, the phone, the TV, the videos, anything with the screen is screen time, because sometimes parents, they'll give kind of an hour of each, which then adds up to quite a bit of time with interacting with the machine. And I think time spent with screens is time taken away from real learning that can take place. And then if there is screen time, it should be as non-threatening and age-appropriate and educational as possible.
and turn it into being interactive with the adult also being involved and stopping, put the pause button on, and ask a question. Because if you're just taking in information on screen, are you really, is it registering? Is it getting into that relevant system in your memory system? Or is it just kind of going there? So if you're interacting with a child who's doing something on the screen, and you can ask those questions, you can turn them into learning opportunities. Because we always talk about, many of my kids have had missed opportunities because of either lack of a program in their community, lack of a caregiver available. You can't catch up on lost learning opportunities once you reach a certain age. So we got to optimize when you're the early brain and reduce trauma, positive influences on early brain development.
This was just actually, could you just repeat the name of the organization with the guidelines on screen time?
Oh, the Canadian Pediatric Society.
And I think the Canadian Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry also have guidelines, as does the American Society of Pediatrics. Most of these professional organizations, or at least the medical ones, have provided information and guidelines on screen time. And I think the psychologists probably have too, and probably educators. It's across professions that there are concerns about the amount of time that children spend with screens.
And this one will be our last question, and it is, how can I apply this when I'm working with a family?
So I think I alluded to using the neurorelationship or the neurorelational framework with families, and basically we use the 3 steps to guide our assessment process. So what I start off with is asking families why they have come to see me and allow them time to explain their story. But then I quickly start describing step 1 of what green zone, good quality sleep, and stress responses are. And then we have a discussion about the quality of the relationships and their child's social emotional milestones. There recently was a study in Alberta that asked sort of folks in the street what they knew about social emotional milestones. And unfortunately, many Albertans didn't really know those 7 levels of engagement that I described to you. They could describe more about what their child could do with regards to academic learning and motor development and language development, but not so much social emotional development. And then I use that triggers and toolkits chart as I'm talking with families to help them understand their child's strengths and challenges. And as I said before, families are finding it very useful.
I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for your attention, and obviously this is a topic of interest, and perhaps we can expand on some of these other ideas at future webinars. Stay tuned for information on the next sessions through the FASD webcast series. To get updates and registration and information about these sessions, please email fasd@gov.ab.ca and ask to be added to our mailing list. You can also find past and future webcasts at http://fasd.alberta.ca or sign up at http://hslearningseries.ca. This webcast was recorded and will be posted online along with videos of previous webcasts, and also try to make available the larger handouts so that you can have them at your hand. The video link will be sent out to all registrants in the near future. So if you have feedback about today's webcast and ideas for future topics of interest to you, please email at fasd@govalberta.ca and let us know. So look forward to sharing more information with you. Thanks.